I learned another very valuable lesson today. When I'm working in the garden, I keep a 5-gallon bucket out here to just throw my compost into. When I pick a weed or if I prune something, I'll throw all of the debris into that bucket and then move it over to the compost pile when I'm done. The last time I was out here, I forgot to dump that bucket and it rained. And so when I came out here, I've got this bucket full of debris and water, and it's been hot, and it was disgusting. So, big 5-gallon bucket, probably a little more than half full of sludge, and I carried it over to the compost pile, and I lifted it over the edge, and stupid me, I've dumped it. And the slime and the sludge and the stink came all splashing back at me, and I was covered with disgustingness. So I'm not going to do that again. If I'm going to keep a bucket out here, I'll put some holes in it, but from now on, I'm going to empty that bucket when I'm finished with it. It's over there, airing out way over there where I can't smell it. So I'm going to start looking at these tomato plants. These are my Determinate tomatoes. So they'll be my salsa tomatoes. They're sauce or paste tomatoes. What it means to have a Determinate tomato variety is that these plants grow in a little bit more of a bush habit. They get to a certain height and size during the growing season, and then they sort of put all their fruit off at once and die off. I like using Determinate variety tomatoes for that reason, because when I do canning and make salsa, I want to do it in a day or two, so I'm not harvesting all season long and getting out my canning equipment, weekend after weekend and doing it. So I love that these tomatoes will just kind of put on their fruit all at once so that I can just get my canning done all at one time. You treat them a little bit differently from an indeterminate variety. Indeterminate just means it's indefinite how long it can grow. An indeterminate tomato will just grow and grow and grow as long as you let it, for one thing. You can prune them, but disease will kill an indeterminate tomato or the cold. So I do have some of those, and we can talk about how to care for those too, but today's mission is these Determinate tomatoes. I am a greedy gardener. I don't have a lot of space, but I want a lot of fruit. I want a lot of produce. And so I really overcrowd my garden. I do it every year. And while, some might say that you're not going to get as much yield out of it, really, I still get a ton. I still get a ton of stuff. And really for me, what it just means is that it's more work for me. So these tomatoes are really crammed in here. And they're spaced about 18 inches apart, and they're kind of offset into 3 rows. So I have, this tomato is lined up with a tomato on the other side. There's another one here, and in between them, in the middle, there's another. And so one thing that's really important with tomato plants, especially this year and this rainy season, is if these leaves don't have an opportunity to dry out, they could get disease. So we want to make sure that there's lots of nice airflow going through these plants. And because you shouldn't prune a Determinate tomato for size, we're gonna take a look at just pruning some of these leaves out and getting some airflow in here. The reason we don't want to prune, like you might think of pruning in the traditional sense, is we're not going to take these suckers out, because when a Determinate tomato puts out a sucker, any tomato puts out a sucker, that sucker has potential to grow more fruit, essentially become another plant. In an indeterminate tomato, those suckers become plants, which have more suckers that become plants, and they can just get huge and out of control. And so you want to prune those suckers out, because if you have this giant plant in one root system, you're not going to get as much yield. Well, maybe a lot of yield, but you'll get smaller fruits. If you prune some of that away and let the plant focus on a few, one or two main stems, you'll get bigger, nicer fruit. For determinate tomatoes, if you cut those off, you're really limiting your potential for harvest. These are only going to grow so big. You're not going to have to worry about them growing so big that they can't support their own fruit, nutrient-wise, for example. Structurally, they do need support, so that's why these are in cages. So I'm going to take a look at these tomatoes because I've been out here a couple times and pruned. A couple things to note is even though you're not supposed to prune determinate tomatoes, you always want to make sure that you don't have tomato leaves laying on the ground. There's some opportunity for soil-borne illnesses, diseases to splash up on the underside of your tomato leaves if they're really close to the ground. That can happen anyways, but we want to take some preventative measures. So I've already been out here a couple of times and I've got my tomatoes up off the ground. Right now it's anywhere from like 9 to 11 inches off the ground. I like to keep them nice and high, and that really helps to get the airflow under here too. So there's a good chance I'll take off a little bit more too. And then because I don't really want to cut any of these suckers out, I want to make sure that they're able to grow as many tomatoes as possible. I'm going to try this year just taking out some of the leaves. These leaves that are facing the outside, I'm going to go ahead and leave these because these are the guys who are, they're not shaded by their neighbors, and they're really the ones that are gathering the sun's light and using, absorbing that for their photosynthesis. But where I have leaves that are really in here and it's dark and they're not able to dry out, I'm going to start pruning some of those out. So let's take a look at the structure of the tomato plant, and I'll show you what I mean about pruning leaves and not suckers. This is a really good example to start with. We can see it pretty easily. I do have it just tied to a stake because although I would have preferred to cage it, I ran out of cages and they're sort of spendy. So I've got this one staked up. It's trapped between two other caged plants here, so it's not going anywhere. And if I have to put like a rod across here to support it, I will, but it looks like that stake is holding up just fine. So if we just take a look at the structure of this plant, it'll help you understand what we do next. So you can see that there's a main stem down here. And I've already pruned a lot of this. So there was a branch here and here. So when we look, let's see if I can get a good example of this. Here, this is a good example. Right here. So here's how a tomato plant is built, I guess. There's a main stem, and these go throughout the plant. There's a main stem, and then you have, as we go up, a leaf, right? There's a branch with a leaf coming off. In between the main stem and this leaf is this little guy right here. This is a sucker. This will grow into essentially another whole main stem. Cool, Molly. So this will grow into another main stem. And as we keep moving up, we'll get to a spot where we're going to have a branch of flowers. And then again, it'll grow up. Here's another leaf, and then there will be, a sucker and a main stem and a flower. So going back, let's do that again. Here's the main stem. Sorry, I got a little friend here helping me pollinate, so I'm trying not to touch him. Here's the main stem. First we have a leaf, then we have a sucker, and as we keep going up the main stem, here's another flower cluster. These will turn into the fruit. when we talk about pruning a tomato plant, most of the time we're talking about taking this sucker out. We don't want a whole tomato plant growing right here in this little armpit. For determinate tomatoes like we're looking at here, we want to keep these because this branch will develop all of this. This branch will develop a leaf, a sucker, and a flower, and so it'll produce for us. So if I go back down to here, you'll see what I kind of did. On the bottom of the stem, this would have been a leaf and a sucker. I pruned that off. This was a leaf that I pruned off, and these are gone because I don't want them touching the ground. This was a leaf. This is a sucker. And this sucker, you can see, is growing into essentially that same sequence separately. We're going to leave that because this guy is going to produce fruit for us. So let's go back. This was a leaf. This is a sucker. And keep going up this main stem. You can see it branched out twice. So one of these was a sucker at some point. Oh, it was this one because I can see there's a leaf. So here the main stem goes this way. Leaf, sucker, follow the main stem, and we've got, here's our flower cluster, and we've got some baby tomatoes growing on there. Leaf, there was a sucker in here. It looks like I either pruned it or it just died. I'm not really sure. So you can kind of see the pattern here. And understanding this can help understand, you know, what we can remove the plant from the plant without sacrificing any of the fruit. And in this case, it's really this leaf. Now, the leaves are necessary to grow a healthy plant. They are how, you know, the plant brings in nutrients from the sun. Sometimes it can even absorb nutrients through the leaves too. But excuse me. But it doesn't necessarily need all of the leaves. And so, because this is so crowded in here, I mean, look in there, it's just a jungle. You can see if I reach back in here, I can feel the moisture. It's still wet. I can actually see, what is this? I see a little spot in here. I hope that's not the start of some sort of disease, but we're going to prevent that by taking some of these leaves out. So if I look at this particular plant, I've been digging around in here, and now this is nice and open, but I see that it's so overlapping with this plant that I could take some of those leaves off. So where I might start is, I'm going to leave this one because this is reaching out into the sunshine off the side of the bed here. But this guy is really overlapping with his buddy next door. And so I'm going to remove that. And there's a couple of things I can do. Let me grab my little clipper here. Normally when I prune, I'm going to take the whole branch from all the way up here. But I could also, if I wanted to, just take half of this leaf set. So if I'm pruning this off because there's some disease on here, let's say this leaf and this leaf have some disease, I want those gone. But I wouldn't want to just cut off those leaves. In that case, I'd want to take the whole stem here. When I'm pruning this out just to get some airflow, what I could do is just say, well, here's this giant leaf set. It's overlapping. I'm just going to take half of it here. And, you know, that's that much more space that the plant has to grow. So I could leave it like that, or I could just take it from the stem here. In this case, I don't know, I tend to just take it from the stem. It really opens up the plant and creates a nice hole in there for the airflow. So this is a sucker. It's going to continue to grow. There's a good chance that I'll need to take this sucker and tie it to something eventually, whether it's to this stake or maybe I have to put another stake in there. I'll need to do that too. So I've got a lot of pruning to do. All of these back leaves, I think, like, oh, see, I just broke one, so that answers that question for me. I'll take that one off. But like these guys that are really far back in here, they're not really getting any sun. They're not really helping the plant at all, and they're just sort of making it shady and damp in there. So I'll probably, some of those really far back ones, I'll probably prune those out too. Being expert, I'm just learning. Most of what I learned is from, you know, in the garden growing up a little bit when I was paying attention, and Google. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I just kind of study things online, and I hear a lot of conflicting information. So last year I think I pruned up my Determinate tomatoes quite a bit because I thought I was supposed to. I didn't do the thorough research, but just know, I mean, I'm telling you these things because it's how I'm doing it this year, and I'll let you know how it goes. And there's a lot of right ways to do everything in the garden. Had I not overcrowded these plants quite a bit, I wouldn't prune them at all, except to get them up off the ground. So I'm not telling you this is the right way. I'm just telling you this is how I'm doing it, and we'll see how it goes. I know that I'm going to get a great harvest. I do every year, no matter what, but I'm just going to keep working at it and perfecting it. And besides that, I really enjoy the process of pruning tomatoes. There's something, I think, a little bit therapeutic about the process of pruning. So many of the things that I do in the garden can be sort of a metaphor for life. I've always strongly believed that simplification is really good for your soul. It's really good for your psyche, and I think that applies to plants too. You know, these tomato plants have a lot of extra, and we're just going to get the extra out so that the plants can focus on what's really important, and in their case it's producing fruit. In our case as people,
hey, why did you put the tomatoes and the strawberries?
What?
Put the tomatoes and the strawberries.
The strawberry plants are over there, remember? On the other side. As people, we really benefit from getting the extra out of our lives too, and resimplifying. So, you know, if something or someone is in your world and they are doing more harm than good, or just not helping, and sometimes it's good for us to just sort of get rid of that extra and focus on what's really important. A couple of other things to note. First of all, these tomatoes are just so gorgeous. This doesn't last forever. These will eventually probably start to get some spots. The bugs will come out here and start eating them. So this point in time in the garden for the tomatoes is when they are the most gorgeous. And so clipping off some of these leaves is a little bit sad because they are just really pretty. Things to note is I want to be really careful not to over prune these too, because the plants do need these leaves, and later on in the season when, you know, disease and insects start to set in, I will definitely end up pruning off more of these leaves. So at the end of the season, when you're pruning off your plants, it's often, you know, you sometimes can end up with plants that have very few leaves. And so I want to avoid that. Another thing, tomato flowers contain both male and female, I don't know, reproductive organs. I don't know if plants have organs, but these flowers are both male and female. And so you don't need an insect to go from flower to flower to pollinate these. What happens is the insects go into here and they flap their little wings and they sort of vibrate down the pollen from inside the plant onto, gosh, I don't remember the names of the parts, onto the part that needs to be pollinated. If that doesn't happen, sometimes these don't get pollinated. So one thing you can do as a gardener to help it along is just to kind of give these a little shake. You can do this with your fingers. Some people will come out with a toothbrush and sort of vibrate these little flower clusters as they come in, like, you know, these just kind of vibrate them, and that kind of gets the pollen moving around in there, and that'll pollinate these flowers. So this one has not been pollinated. It'd be interesting to come back out in a day or two and see if my little flicker there helped it out. But that's just a couple of things you can do to help your tomatoes along. We're in here anyways pruning these out, and so we might as well give them a little boost. I wanted to show you this particular plant right here. So it's in this cage. Plant is doing really well, except it's not as tall as some of the others. But if I look in here at the leaves, I can see that we're starting to get some damage here. This looks like it may be a little bit of blight. So I definitely don't want that to spread to my other plants, and so we're gonna get those branches off right away. It's hard to see the screen in the sun, so I don't know what's in the viewfinder here, but we're gonna cut this branch off. Okay. This one. These leaves will not go in the compost. They, if you suspect that a tomato's got some disease on it, don't put that in your compost, because diseases can survive even the composting process. We're just gonna take all of these. Anything that looks like it's yellowing, turning brown here, we're gonna get those out of there. The plants around it look really, really good, so I don't want to lose those. This little branch here is just tiny, so I'm just going to pinch that out with my hands. See, even this brand new growth. So that's not good. That makes me sad. But if we get some of this out of here, oh, see, we even lost a little tomato there. We're going to get this out of here, and we're going to make this plant feel a lot better. See, this one's really crowded in here with the other plants around it. A lot of foliage off this plant. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna survive. It might not grow quite as vigorously as it would otherwise, but it's got a lot of fruit on it too, and I don't want to lose that. So it looks a little sparse and a little sad. I also took quite a bit away from the plants around it, so that to make sure that it's not spreading any potential disease and that it gets lots of good airflow in there. So I'll also treat this with a spray as well after I'm all done here. Poor plant. All finished. You can see the tomatoes don't look quite as lush as they did, but they definitely are going to be feeling better now. If I go down here, you can see right through, the air pockets in there, and you can see that the airflow is really going to get through there, get the leaves dried out. As I was doing the pruning, I focused on the interior of the beds, and especially where, it's been sunny and hot today, and even after hours and hours of sun, there were still leaves that were just dripping wet. And so I took that as sort of a sign that those leaves maybe needed to be thinned out in the middle there. So lots of more room here between my tomato plants. I'm a little bit nervous, as I always am, that maybe I overdo it. But like I said, as a greedy gardener, that's the consequence, right? You have to sacrifice a little bit. So I did this bed. These are Viva Italia tomatoes on this side, Roma tomatoes on that side, and then I did this bed as well. These are also Viva Italia tomatoes, and then I trimmed up my competition tomatoes too. Looks like that one needs to be tied up a little bit. One other thing that I wanted to note as I went through here is I was tying these plants where I saw that they needed to be as I went. And all I have right now for tying these up is this little string of jute. I don't really like using that. Let me see if there's a better example. I think there is over here. I don't really like using that thin jute for tying in the garden. It's nice because it's a natural fiber. It can decompose, but what I don't like about it is how thin it is, because this isn't a good example, but how thin it is, because I feel like it can cut into the plant a little bit here. So what I think I'm going to do is start tearing up some old t-shirts and using strips of that cotton to tie up my plants, because I feel like it'll be gentler on it. So like here, that's a big, tough leaf or branch there, and you can see there's a little bit of scarring there. So I'm gonna switch that out and probably come out here with some cotton and tie those up. So the tomato pruning is done for my determinate plants. Next, I will need to start working on these indeterminate varieties. This is I think this one, this row from this pole over is a Gladiator. From this pull down, I believe, is the Super Sauce. And they're pretty crammed in there, and they need to be pruned, and they need to be supported too. So I'll get to that next. But here is what I pulled out of that garden. And it's all been wilted now because it's been sitting out here in the hot sun, but I wanted to show you because it's a lot. I took a lot out of there. It'll help, help those plants to breathe a little bit and dry out, keep the disease out. I was thinking about all of this clippings sitting here, and I thought about, as I'm sweating here in the sun, when you go to get a haircut in the summertime and you're sweaty and it feels gross and it's sticky, and how great it feels after you've got a haircut and it's light and airy and you just feel healthy and refreshed. And you look down at the floor and see all of your hair clippings and think, my gosh, it's no wonder I was hot every day. And I'm really hoping that that's how my tomatoes feel too. I hope that, the pruning process makes them feel good and refreshed. And so my next steps will be I'll come out here and spray for bugs and fungus. I'll give them a little bit of time to recover, and I won't do that in the heat of the day. I'll probably come out in the evening after it's cooled off and give them a good spray so that they don't develop any diseases and keep those nasty critters off. So that's it for now. Next time I think we'll talk about those indeterminate tomatoes and show you what I do for those. Talk to you later.